Hi there, everybody. I'm Sharon Waxman. I'm the founder and editor-in-chief of TheWrap. I'm coming to you from TheWrap's virtual studios at this year's Sundance Film Festival. I'm very excited to welcome a documentarian who has an incredible piece of work that's in the documentary competition of the festival this year. It's called Jihad Rehab, and the filmmaker Meg Smaker is with us. She also participated in TheWrap's 2016 Shortlist Film Festival, where we picked the best shorts of the year. So we've known her for quite a long time. Welcome, Meg.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great to see your face again. It's like that was
so
literally
nice.
The last project that I did before this project. So
that's exactly right. So let's just to start this off, I just want to let you know, because you might not remember, you brought me this shawl as a gift to my home.
That's right. Yes. Yes.
When you came to the opening night filmmakers dinner for the shortlist, when you had a friend who was a finalist. And you had just come from the Middle East where you were working on this film. I'm not sure what country this comes from. Is it from Yemen? It feels like a Bedouin scarf. I love it to death, and I wear it a lot.
I think I actually got that from a friend of mine who owned a shop, a Pakistani man who owns a shop right outside of the outskirts of Dubai, and he imports some amazing stuff from Pakistan. And it's a beautiful piece, and it was
a beautiful piece.
So it's
I've always loved it. We've come full circle. So for those of you who haven't yet seen her film, Meg has spent, is it 3 to 5 years? I can't quite tell, but several years in any event.
Yeah. It was 1 year getting to get access, 3 years of filming, and a 2-year edit. So over half a decade of working on this film, for sure.
Okay, so we're going to call it 5 years of working on this film to tell the story of a very unusual place where they rehabilitate terrorists in Saudi Arabia. So these are men, all men, who have been released from places like Guantanamo, but not only. And they are taught how to think differently, how to change their ideology. And notionally, it's, to me, Meg told me about this idea, this thing that she was working on in my backyard. Might have been 2016, 2015. I can't even remember, but it always stuck with me because I remembered what an interesting idea, because what do we do with these people once we have captured them and arrested them? And especially in Guantanamo, where they've not been given due process. And all the United States wants to do is get rid of these guys, some of whom might have been terrorists, some of them were not. So Meg, first of all, congratulations on getting this film done.
Thanks. Yeah, it was definitely a beast of a project to get done on a myriad of levels, but it was not an easy undertaking. But I'm really happy with and proud of how it's come out, and everyone on the team who's helped make the film is quite happy with it, and everyone from the community who's helped craft this story to make it as so nuanced and complex as it is everyone's really excited for the world to finally see it.
The world to see it. Yeah. I don't think we can talk about the subject of this film without giving people the context of your extraordinary journey that you have done, which is, not only, I have a background in the Middle East myself. I covered the Iraq War. I covered the Palestinian-Israeli conflict for many years. And this girl shows up in my backyard, this big blonde woman. You had a big braid down your back and you speak fluent Arabic. I'm like, okay, what is, and she says she's a firefighter from Seattle. So that doesn't happen every day.
I was actually a firefighter for Cal Fire from the Bay Area.
Oh, for Cal Fire in the Bay Area. In the Bay Area, sorry. Point is, she's a blonde lady firefighter who's working in Saudi Arabia. None of that made any sense to me. Why don't you tell us a little bit briefly, because I want to have time to talk about the film, but tell our viewers sort of how you came to even be making this documentary, your journey.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really, really long story. I can kind of give you because I know we don't have a lot.
Give us the highlights. It is, you're gonna have to do a memoir at some point, but yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm not a firefighter anymore, but I used to be. I was a firefighter in California when 9/11 happened, and that kind of changed my whole world in a myriad of ways. And part of that was it. Everything that I had kind of understood about the world up until that point kind of shattered on that day. And part of the way that I'm wired is when I don't understand something, it scares me. Right. We're a lot of times when we're afraid of things we don't understand. And so the way that I'm wired, if I don't understand something, I try to learn as much about that as possible, and then it no longer becomes frightening to me. So, for example, when I was a firefighter, things that I was always scared of was hazardous materials calls, because when we would watch videos, those would always be the kind of videos pre 9/11 that would like kill firefighters. And so because of that, I really didn't understand hazardous materials. I then became a hazmat specialist, and it was no longer scary to me. I understood it. That's just how I've always been wired. And so when 9/11 happened, I didn't really understand the world in which I lived at that point. And so 6 months after 9/11, to try to like answer those questions for myself, I traveled to Afghanistan and was immediately humbled by my own ignorance of the world. And my experience there directly contradicted everything that I'd been seeing on mainstream media. And that contradiction between because I was 20 years old at the time. When you're in your 20, you have a very assured view of the world. And that view was shattered with my time in Afghanistan. The people there treated me with such kindness and hospitality and grace. And at that same time, my country was bombing their country. And that just kind of blew my mind. And so that kind of was the impetus that set me on this like journey, is to like almost 20-year journey now to kind of better understand the world in which I lived. And that was kind of the impetus for leaving the fire service and moving to Yemen, where I studied Arabic and Islam. And I got a job there running a firefighting academy. So I was a head fire instructor teaching Yemeni men how to fight fire in Yemen. And so which is where I first heard about the rehab center, was when I was living in Yemen and teaching a firefighting course. And I overheard some guys talk about this rehab center. And that was back in 2007. And it always, just like you, it always stuck with me, that story. It was just really interesting that this place even existed back then. So yeah. And that's a very it's
a very foreshortened. Yeah, people can go on Facebook and look you up, and you had a beautiful director's statement that takes you more into detail. So let's get to the sort of a couple of the huge challenges that you had to overcome to make this film. It's one thing to know that this place exists. It's another, as a journalist in an autocratic dictatorial kingdom like Saudi Arabia, to get access. And as you said earlier, it took you a year. How did you get access? How did you do it?
Yeah, I think because of my time in Yemen, one thing I realized living there is the way to get something done is usually not to go through official channels. It's through back channeling, through building relationships, through kind of understanding kind of who's in charge of what, and to have a relationship with those people. And the official channels are kind of there to like keep people out. And so it was a year of like back channeling. And then finally, there was the way that like a lot of these governments work is they'll never tell you no, but they'll just put up all these hurdles in front of you that make it like, after a while, you just kind of give up. And it was like that for a year. And then it got to the point where the person that I was talking kind of acquiesced and said, okay, I was asking for 1 year unfettered access to the center and El Hayr, which is the prison you see in the opening of the film. And they said, okay, we'll give you physical access, but you're not allowed to film anything, not one frame, unless, and here's where the hurdle comes in, these men agree to film with you from the jump, meaning that I would have to meet them. And the same day I met them, they would have to agree to be part of this project, knowing full well that a lot of these guys were just coming back from Syria, from ISIS, and like, or fresh off the plane from Guantanamo. And the last person they would want to talk to is someone like me. And they were right. And that was exactly what happened. That the first couple of groups I met with, there was older Al-Qaeda guys. I would start to speak with them and they would just look at the ground and not acknowledge my presence. I went to speak with like the younger Al-Qaeda guys, or the younger ISIS guys, same thing. But then it just
they probably had no experience talking to a Western woman, period, ever in their lives.
I mean, I think that it's there's a lot more of the integration of different cultures, I think, in the Middle East than people give it credit for. I think that it's a combination of just like who I was and what country I was from, and kind of where they were at in terms of their mental space. Sure. But I think, but then what did happen is, serendipitously, that was the first time that Saudi Arabia accepted the first batch of non-Saudi nationals through this rehab program. And those were the next people that I met with. And they happened to be from Yemen. And so when I started talking, I had Yemeni Arabic, which is very unusual for a Western to have. And so Yemeni Arabic is very distinct in terms of its dialect. And it's very, like, when you hear it, you know it right away. And so when I started speaking, their heads popped up and they're just like, why do you speak our mother tongue? And I told them I used to live there for almost 5 years. And they wanted to know where. And I said, in the old city by the Sila. And they were talking about Fasa restaurants. And there was this immediate rapport of this shared experience of their homeland that they hadn't been back to for over 15 years. And just having that kind of immediate kind of bond and rapport. And we talked for hours. And then after that, I asked them at the very end of it, would any of you guys be interested into like talking more about this project? And a couple of hands went up, and then word spread around the rehab center, and doors started opening, and it was kind of like, I wasn't looked at as a journalist. It was just like, that's just Meg. And then I wound up interviewing about 150 to 200 of these guys. Wow. And then followed a small group of them for 3 years. And again, the interviews weren't like, some of them were 10 minutes long and some of them were 10 hours long. Khalid, the guy who opens the film, his interview was almost 10 hours long. So, and yeah, that's kind of, even though it sounds like a long story, that's a very Cliff Note version of.
Yeah, well, we're not gonna shove 3 years into 3 minutes. It can't be done. But the film is fascinating. So just so people understand, like, you don't easily get access in Saudi Arabia in general, and you can tell that there's not a woman who is filmed at all in this. So nobody's wives, on the streets. It's clear that you made a lot of what you were permitted to use and to shoot. But this rehab center, for people to get a sense of it, is like, there's a pool, there's training on interpersonal relations, and it's interesting because it's the Saudi guys who are doing the training. And I guess the idea is to integrate these people back into Saudi society. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that one thing you have to understand is at the program, they have 2 different programs there. They have one for what they call like normal terrorists, which is people who've just gone to like Syria for a couple of months or like maybe a year. Right. And that's only like 3 to 4 months long. But the ones for the guys who are trained from Gitmo, that's a year long. And the reason for that is like threefold. Number one, they're spending 15 years in Guantanamo. You're way more radicalized than if you just went to go to Syria for a couple of months.
Well, and they've been tortured too.
Yeah, that's what I mean. They've been radicalized by their experience there. And that's number one. But number two, they have a lot of trauma they need to work through. PTSD, they have a lot of psychological and sometimes physical problems that were kind of gotten from their experiencing. But on top of that, and this is the key, and what I think a lot of people find surprising is you have to understand that how old some of these guys were when they went in and when they got out. So for example, one of the characters went in when he was 16 and he got out when he was 32. Yeah. And that, in terms of your formative years, that's a huge chunk of your formative years. And so all this socialization that normally happens during that time just didn't happen. And so a lot of the times in the latter half of the program, it's just preparing these guys for the outside world. And it's not just the outside world, it's like a different world. When they went in, there was no internet, there was no Facebook, there was no like Google.
Right.
Get out. Right. It's a completely different world. So it's trying to prepare them for that. And so there's classes on what the internet is, and there's classes on how to find a wife, along with classes of like, religious classes and like therapy and things like that, which I think a lot of people find surprising, because if you don't prepare these guys, then statistically they're more likely to go back to that life, because that's the only place that accepts them or that they can understand. And so, for example, if you steal a car and then you go to prison and you don't have any like training, and you get out and you have to pay your rent, and how are you gonna pay your rent? Well, you don't have a job, and that's the only skill set you have. You're going to steal a car again. And I feel like with these guys, one thing that I'll say that I was surprised at was how multifaceted this program was. Like, I expected it to go in, it was just going to be like religious classes, but there's art therapy, and there's like 12 main, like there's history lessons, because the history that they were taught in these groups is not really a accurate portrayal of the history of maybe what has happened. And so it's really extensive, the kind of stuff that they kind of had to do. We only kind of you only get a little bit of it in the film.
And then you also came up against another challenge, which is that when Mohammed bin Salman came along, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, who cracked down on a lot of things, and of course, famously ordered the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, that atrocity, that impacted your ability to complete the film or to do your work, and also how the men were being treated in some way or how they were being categorized.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of like those 3 years that I was filming in Saudi Arabia was some of the biggest changes that that country has seen in a long time. Like, so for example, when I started filming, women couldn't drive, women couldn't go to live sporting events, and by the end of it, those things were no longer true. And so you had a lot of positive changes in the kingdom as well. And I think, like, for example, one of our guys is a huge soccer fan, and the first thing he did when he got out is he went to a soccer game, and we went to go stand in line because it's segregated. So you have the men's section in one place, and then you have the women's section and family section in the other. And we were standing in the men's section because I'm filming him, and we got to the front of the line. They wouldn't allow him inside because they're like, "You're with a woman. You have to go to the family section." Again, like, this is a person who's been in Guantanamo for 15 years, hasn't been around women, and so he got to go to the women's section and sit with me because I was filming him, and he was on cloud nine. This was like he never experienced
Oh, wow.
like women cheering and for their favorite soccer team, and like, and it was just like they're like talking about the players, and he's just like, he had a really great experience. And like, also when there wasn't movie theaters in Saudi Arabia when I first started filming, and then all of a sudden we're watching like The Rock on the big screen. And so there was a lot of changes that happened there during that time that you could see over that course. But it was more of this center was Mohammed bin Naif's pet project. Like, he was really involved in the center, in the curriculum. He like met most of the guys
He's
that
another
graduated
prince.
from. Yeah, he was the prince before. He was the crown prince before Mohammed bin Salman. And with every administration change, obviously priorities change. And so when there was that kind of like, that very, very sudden transition, you had new people in power, and those new people in power, this was no longer maybe a priority, or it just, there's a lot of things that kind of fell through the cracks because of that. And then policy shifted, just like, when we went from Obama to Trump, there was the focus or the priorities shifted as well. But these guys just happened to be in that transition period, and so things didn't quite go as planned, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. It's very interesting. And just as a sociological kind of chronicle of these people who are also describing, and not incidentally, their experiences inside Guantanamo, which we do not have very much information about, because obviously this is a blight and a stain on America's reputation. We don't like to share what we're doing in this totally extra constitutional, extrajudicial kind of place where we've done things I'm sure we have reason to be ashamed of, even to, in the treatment of terrorists.
The information is out there. Like there's a torture report, which is like, I think it's over 1,000 pages, very thorough. And I read that, which is not, it's really, really a hard read, because when you realize things like the United States government sanctioned sexual assault as an interrogation tactic is pretty important.
There's one of the people you interviewed mentioned that, and your first thought is like, that can't be. And then I thought,
yeah, well, I mean, if you go to the report, they do talk about that as well, because that was like part of your job as a documentarian, is to fact check all the stuff that you're told. But I think that, like, for me, I knew a lot of the information beforehand because all the research I did, but there's a very big difference between like knowing the facts and hearing someone's personal story and the emotional impact that had. So there's logically wrapping your brain around that, and then there's like sitting down with someone. It's like you read a history book about World War II, and you logically understand about the millions of people who've died. But as a human, you can't wrap your brain around that.
Yeah.
But then you read Anne Frank, and that's one person's story, their emotional journey, and it kind of that kind of, as humans, we can wrap our brain around that much. The whole largeness of this other thing, that it's really hard to. So for me, it was reading the torture report is one thing, but actually hearing someone's emotional journey and experience is a completely different thing.
So let me just ask you, as somebody who was thrown sideways by 9/11, and that it completely shattered your view of the world, and then you set out to understand what you seemed incomprehensible to you when it happened. Now at the end, you've now finished this film, and you've spent many, many years trying to understand other mindsets and cultures. Where have you gotten? What have you learned, and what do you now understand that you didn't understand in 2001?
I think in 2001, I think it had to do both with a bit my age and maybe a bit of American culture in terms of our kind of very
Yeah.
strong opinions about places that we might not actually know that much about. But I think that it's like the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. And so for me, this like I lived in the Middle East for almost 6 years, and then total of 10 overall if you count the time in Saudi. And every day I learned something new. And because of that, every day I realize how much I don't know. And it's very humbling to have that. And so I think for me, a lot of that had to do with a humility of realizing that this is a very complicated topic and issue that has far-reaching kind of like implications. And as you see when we talk about Guantanamo, we get the headlines of like waterboarding stuff, but then you see kind of the ripple effect. And what I like about this part of the film is it's, yeah, these guys were released, but that it still haunts them. It still affects the rest of their life. They're still painted with that brush.
Right.
And I think in terms of then versus now, there's a humility, but there's also like, there's a commonality and a humanness that I think no matter where you're from, what country, what religion, there's a universality in the specificity of this film that I think that is, for me, at the end of the day, like we're all people, we're all humans. I know it sounds kind of corny, but like I never expected to have anything in common with these men. And one of the guys in the film, Nader, he's a jokester. He tells jokes all the time. And when I first met him, he was just telling really dark jokes about Guantanamo. And I think any other person would have looked at that as kind of like strange. But when he was doing that, I got it right away. Because when I was a firefighter, we would see some pretty horrific stuff. And the way that we would process it and like, decompress is we would tell really off-colored jokes to kind of just get it out of our system, and that kind of dark humor I saw right away in Nodder. And that was like the way that like we kind of related from the jump. And, he would like, I remember one of the first times he met me, he's like, Meg, you need to go on Guantanamo diet. You lose 40 pounds in a month. Good for you. Like it's just, and he's talking about hunger strikes, and he's talking about being tortured and being so desperate that he refuses to eat. Now, when you think about in that context, it seems like really arresting, but it was that kind of way of dealing with being exposed to horrific things, having horrific things done to you, and dealing with that in a way of using like humor and comedy to process it and decompress. So yeah, I think there's it's not a political film. It's a very human story. It's a very intimate and vulnerable story of these guys and their experience. And kind of from that like specificness of it, you can see a lot of universal themes, hopefully anyway.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Like, not a lot of people have seen this film, but after today, that's no longer going to be true. So we'll see.
Exactly. No, it's super interesting. Well, Meg, thank you so much for being with us and for this film, Jihad Rehab. And I really look forward to seeing how people respond to this very, very unique film that you've made. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.